Have you ever said, I need to write a book? I have a story to tell. I was asked by a young man, is voting important? In today's video, we'll highlight writer's contribution to the American love story, which is voting, just to illustrate how important that story is that you've been thinking about writing. Hello, my name is Kenneth Lucius. Together, we are shaping the world through stories. We're talking about writer's contribution to the American love story, voting. We know this letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to King George. We know it as the Declaration of Independence. And I can imagine when they sealed this letter up and sent it off to King George. I don't know who the carrier was or if a signature was required. But I can imagine when the king got the letter and his people saying, we got a letter from the colonists, they call themselves now. You know, those guys, you know, who were homeless and, you know, their kids. We got a letter from them. Okay. He opens the letter. King George says, what do they want? Do you remember the want, the belief, and the fear? It's a part of every aspect of life. What do the colonists want? From this writing of Thomas Jefferson, they want life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. Most importantly, they want the right to vote for those that will govern them. A seed is planted, the right to vote. And so they're telling the king, no taxation without representation. If you don't live over here with us, we're not going to pay you, and we don't want to be governed by you. We want the right to vote. Okay. I'm sure the king was looking at, okay, 3 years ago, these same guys, these same colonists had went on one of our ships. We had a lot of tea on that ship. And they say that the Native Americans that went on the ship over there in Boston and threw the tea off. And I'm pretty sure they was like, okay, y'all just gonna run off on the plug. And now you figuring that you're not gonna give us none of the tobacco money, none of the cotton money no more. Right? Y'all just gonna be independent of us after all we've done for y'all. And people, once they see you at a low status, they could never see you a lot of time as equal. That's why he wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, being nice, nasty, it don't appear that you realize that we're all equal. And so King George, I'm pretty sure, he was getting those red coats together. Because his men, they go on the battlefield in tailored suits from the cotton that they've been getting. They've been making suits out of them and sending these men out to war. And I'm sure Thomas Jefferson and the colonists knew that King George would be sending the British men to the colonies to fight. What did Thomas Jefferson and the colonists believe? They believed that if they stand united together as a union, that they could overcome the great enemy. What did they fear? They feared that if they did not stay together, then King George, he would begin to implement the divide and conquer strategy. And some that would be loyal to him, then therefore the division will cause them to lose the war. And they will become slaves by taxation forever. That is the want, the belief, and the fear. Okay? King George, he sent the men. We know the story. Under the leadership of George Washington, he devised these plans, these war strategies, and he employed the Africans that were slaves to fight in this Revolutionary War. And at that time, Vermont, I think, was the first to be a free state during this time. Okay? The colonies with the Africans go to war against Great Britain, win the war, and now, instead of the 13 colonies, we become the United States of America. Transition 13. From 1776, when Thomas Jefferson wrote his contribution to the American love story, which is voting, to 1789, when the first president of the United States was voted in by the people, which was George Washington, the war general of the Revolutionary War. And so after the war, it seemed like immediately the division had started. The North wanted to abolish slavery. The South wanted to continue in slavery and the benefits of the slave trade. And so the slaves that were in the South would run to the North to be free. They wanted the same thing: freedom, justice, and equality, the same as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the seed that was planted in this soil. And so we highlight our next writer, which is Harriet Beecher Stowe. When this law in the South was created, that if someone in the North saw one of the slaves that had ran away from the South, if they saw them up north, that they would have to bring them back to the South, right? And so these people that was from the North began to see the cruelty of the South. And so Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister encouraged her to write a story about it, because she was writing poems and poetry, and her sister said, if I had that kind of talent, I'd already write a big story. And so this is why I encourage you guys to write your story, because your story is important to the world. Okay, so Harriet Beecher Stowe's contribution to the American love story, voting, is Uncle Tom's Cabin, depicting the life of slavery in the South. And so keep in mind, we're answering the question, is voting important? Okay, and so as she wrote this book, the only other book that outsold Uncle Tom's Cabin at that time was the Holy Bible. So a lot of people all over the world was reading this book. And so it got in the hands of the president of that time, which was Abraham Lincoln. And it was written that he said when he met her, oh, so you're the little lady that wrote the book that started this big war, which was the Civil War of free states, slave states, this is causing a war, right? So the war started, right? And Abraham Lincoln, he believed from the forefathers, Thomas Jefferson and crew, that united we could beat anyone, but divided we're going to be conquered. So he wanted to preserve that union at all costs, right? And he went into the playbook of George Washington to enlist the slaves to fight on his behalf to bring about this union, right? To preserve the union. And the slaves wanted freedom, justice, and equality, right? So this war was won, but we must highlight the writing of Abraham Lincoln was the Emancipation Proclamation. Very similar words from the Declaration of Independence is the Emancipation Proclamation. I declare, I proclaim. Emancipation, independence, right? So, Abraham Lincoln is declaring first that these slaves are free. So now they are fugitives. So now they can fight to go get their loved ones that are left in the South. And that was a big game changer. Because you can imagine running from the South and leaving your family. But what we're talking about is the importance of voting. And so the war was won. The North had won. Abraham Lincoln was killed. So you have free Africans, right? But they don't have citizenship. And so now we go to our next writer, who is Frederick Douglass. So Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. And now we have Andrew Johnson as the president of the United States. We don't know how this is going to go, but the Africans are free, but they're not citizens. So an ex-slave goes to Andrew Johnson, which is Frederick Douglass. And I can imagine Andrew Johnson as president in a similar position as King George was in his day, saying, what do they want? We gave you freedom. What do you want? And so Frederick Douglass, speaking on behalf of the Africans, he knew that the Africans wanted justice, freedom, and equality. He knew that they wanted the right to vote. Why? Why was the right to vote important? Because to vote, you must be a citizen. And if you were a citizen, that meant that you were free. And so Frederick Douglass was appealing to the president that if the Africans could fight in these wars, they should be given the right to vote. And so through his efforts and his writing, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, like the Holy Trinity for us. And so you got the 13th Amendment of freedom, you had the 14th Amendment to citizenship, and the 15th Amendment was the right to vote. And some may say, Well, why is that important? Because at the end of the day, it is what it is, and it's going to be what it's going to be, right? And so what I say to that, in 2024, we take to the ballot box not what is. We take to the ballot box what we want. We take to the ballot box what we believe. We take to the ballot box what we fear. Right? So a story was told. A writer by the name of Matthew. He wrote this story about a lady being caught in the act of adultery. And they brought this lady to the authority because it was customary that if you catch a woman in the act of adultery, she can be stoned to death. One stone at a time. Everybody can pick up a stone and throw them at her until she's dead. Right? And so the authority that they brought her to was Jesus. So they were just waiting on the word to throw the stone. And as they waited on this word, Jesus was writing in the sand. Right? We don't know what he wrote at that time, right? But I could tell you, they never tell you about the line in the sand. They never tell you about the line in the dirt. They never tell you about the lies on your name, because sometimes they can be your kinfolks. But in essence, Jesus said, he without sin cast the first stone. So no one threw a stone, right? And that's what I say for the 2024 election. Don't throw stones. Cast your vote.